Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Glynn Alard. I'm an educator. I'm based at the Iziko South African Museum. And on behalf of the Iziko South African Museums of South Africa, I'd like to welcome you today. And thank you for letting us into your homes, your offices, your space. And I hope that you enjoy this time with us. We present this year the second Iziko Virtual Symposium, and it forms part of the International Museum Day public program. This year's theme is entitled The Future of Museums, Recover and Reimagine. I'm sure that as the title suggests, you can see that this has particular bearing on the experiences that we have all had, but today we shine a light on the particular experiences of museum in the outfall of the last year's COVID pandemic, and how regioning our operations and the way we do business affects our survival and our operations and our mandate in terms of taking heritage to the people. Just some housekeeping before we get started. I'd like to inform you that this session will be recorded. You will see that all our audience members will be muted and your videos should be shut down, so that you can also mute yourself or shut down your video. But you will be able to interact with me and the speakers by sending comments or questions and submitting this through the chat function, which Zoom provides us with. If I could ask you to please address all questions and comments to me. When we go to the chat function, if you can open that up, you'll see right at the top it says everyone. If you click that, you'll see that there's a drop-down list and you will find me there, Glynn Alard. If you could please direct all the questions to me. I will then facilitate the question and answer session and address these questions to each respective speaker. Please use the name of or type in the name of the speaker before the question so that I know who to direct the question to. The question and answer discussion will be held at the end of all three presentations. And so once they've been delivered, I hope that you've had time to think about what you want to ask and how you want to interact with each speaker. We anticipate that we will receive many more questions than we have time to address. So I do apologize if we are not able to get to your question or comment. Please make sure once again that your video has been turned off and that you select the setting for speaker view. The virtual symposium starts today and runs for 3 days, exploring the 3 main disciplines which Iziko Museum are concentrating on, and these are namely art, social history, and natural history. Today's theme is art, and we invite you with us to explore the Iziko South African National Gallery. Our first speaker for the day is the very well-known and widely renowned Hayden Proud, and he was a curator of historical paintings and sculpture at the Iziko Museums of South Africa. He's a graduate of UCT, UNISA, and the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. He previously taught art history at UCT and currently teaches on the Honours Curatorship program there. He has published on various aspects of South African art in such publications as The Visual Century and Revisions Expanding the Narrative of South African Art, as well as in exhibition catalogues and the popular press. In 2019, he curated Irma Stern's Arab Priest, image and content at the Iziko South African National Gallery. Today he's speaking about, his title of his presentation is Sculpting in Relief, the work of Herbert and Eva Meyerowitz at the Iziko South African National Gallery. Hayden, I'd like to thank you for your upcoming presentation.
Is about the work of Herbert and Eva Meyerowitz. Okay. This presentation is about the work of Herbert and Eva Meyerowitz, whose works are to be seen all over the South African National Gallery, but very few people actually are probably aware of their work because the works are permanent fixtures on the building. We're going to be looking at their work in the medium of relief sculpture And we need to just ask ourselves as a preliminary question, what is in fact relief sculpture? Relief is a sculptural technique where the sculpted elements remain attached to a solid background of the same material. The term relief is from the Latin verb relievo, which means to raise. To create sculpture in relief is to give the impression that the sculpted material has been raised above the background. And on the screen, we have a number of examples, including one which is sunken relief, which is from ancient Egypt, where the details and the figures are in fact cut into the planar surface and not made to stand raised from it. So in fact, that planar surface forms the background. We have two other forms of relief that preoccupy us today. One is low relief, which there's an example here from the Parthenon, and high relief on the right, which is yet another example from the Parthenon. Basically, the Meyerowitz has worked in either low or high relief, as we will see. When you arrive at the South African National Gallery, the facade has reliefs by Eva Meyerowitz. There's a relief panel above the main entrance. The doorway has, in fact, sculptures by her husband, Herbert Meyerowitz, on either side, the images of Adam and Eve, which are carved into the supporting consoles of the doorway. And as you progress into the gallery and you walk in and access from the entrance, you arrive in the atrium, which we see here, where you will find directly ahead of you the Lieberman Memorial Door. And the Lieberman Memorial Door is in fact the major masterpiece of Herbert Meyerowitz, and as we may suspect, has some input from his wife, Eva. More about them in a moment. The Lieberman Memorial Door commemorates the first Jewish mayor of Cape Town, whose name was Hyman Lieberman, and he was mayor of Cape Town over 3 successive terms between 1904 and 1907. He died in 1923 and left in his will, a large sum of money for the creation of what he referred to as a useful public monument for the people of Cape Town. And that monument, initially, as is suggested in his will, was to form a memorial archway at the entrance to the company gardens. The city fathers, however, rejected that idea, and the Lieberman trustees were left with a bit of a problem as to what to do next. They then fixed on the idea of putting the money into the completion of the South African National Gallery building. The building was unfinished at this point, so it was decided in a way to incorporate the memorial archway into some form of memorial doorway and to create a central room in the gallery that would be named in perpetuity after Hyman Lieberman, and various other sculptural adornments inside that room also testify to that. On the screen here, you can see a bust by Moses Kotler with standing on a pedestal which says, "This gallery is the gift of Hyman Lieberman, Mayor of Cape Town." So without Lieberman money, the South African National Gallery building would never have been realized. Money was also left by Lieberman to form the Lieberman Institute, which was a cultural center that was set up in District 6, and it unfortunately was destroyed during the group, as a result of the Group Areas Act and the demolitions of that happened in District 6 during the apartheid era. On the right, we see a very nice photograph of the very ornate Lieberman door, which we will talk about in a little bit of detail, because it's such a complex piece of work. And it is all carved in relief sculpture in the medium of wood, in this case a very hard and resistant wood called Burma teak, which is very difficult to carve, is very insect resistant, and is actually used in a lot of architectural buildings in Southeast Asia. Here's Lieberman himself, the commemorative bust by Moses Kotler on the left, and on the right, a photograph of him in his mayoral robes. Lieberman was a much loved figure in the city. In some ways, he had made an enormous amount of money as a result of his trade in foodstuffs. In some ways, he was the sort of supermarket king of his day, dealing in produce. And this subject will come up again later when we look at the subject matter that was selected for the doors. Now to look at the artists that made the door and many of the other sculptural reliefs at the gallery. We have on the left Herbert Vladimir Meyerowitz, who was brought out to South Africa in 1925 as the first lecturer in sculpture at the newly created Michaelis School of Fine Art at UCT. And on the right, his wife, Eva, who had met him. She'd been born in Berlin. He met her in Berlin when they were both students studying at an art school in Berlin. And they came out to South Africa together in 1925. So they're both accomplished and trained sculptors. She, however, was also not only a sculptor, but was also a very fine anthropologist and academic. And she published a whole number of books in her post-South African career, because the two of them left South Africa in about 1935 and went to settle in Ghana, where they worked at the Akimota College and founded the West African Institute of Art, where they subsequently both taught for some years. Meyerowitz came from St. Petersburg, and he was a Russian, obviously he was a Russian-born person. And sad to say that when he eventually got back to England in 1945 after the war, both of them being Jewish, of course, couldn't go back to Europe as a result of the war. When Herbert arrived back in London in 1945, he was horrified to learn that his entire family had been wiped out in the siege of Leningrad, otherwise known as St. Petersburg. And in just total despair, he in fact committed suicide. So his life ended pretty young at the age of 45. However, his wife, Eva, continued living until 1994, and she basically made more of a career for herself as an anthropologist and art historian. Now, this is a overdoor panel that is on the inside of the Lieberman door in the Lieberman room itself. You see all these figures representing the different races abiding in South Africa, all supporting this tablet on which is inscribed Lieberman's name and the dates at which he served as mayor. And as you can see, there's a very diverse population that is featured here. He was, he belonged to an earlier pre-apartheid age, and his money was, as I said, given to an open, non-racial cultural institution that was sadly destroyed in District 6. You also see in the center of the tablet the Cape Town City coat of arms. Now we're going to talk a bit about the way in which relief sculptures were made. They worked in wood, of course. They also worked in stone. They also worked in plaster and clay. We'll talk a little bit about some of those media. Here's a photograph of Meyerowitz sitting outside this Michaelis School of Fine Art, probably taken soon after he arrived there, sitting there enjoying having a cigarette, one of the rare sort of casual photos of him that have survived. Now, the Lieberman door, which was to be the main memorial to the late mayor, who, as I said, had died in 1923, was going to be, because there was a Jewish artist involved, it was a Jewish man that was being honored. The subject of the doors very much focused on Jewish themes. And here we have a drawing that has survived. This is actually quite a version of the image of the drawing taken before it was damaged, but the original still exists, and it shows Meyerowitz's plans for the door. And above the door, the main feature above the door is a scene which shows a scene from the Old Testament of Eliezer, who had been chosen by Abraham and sent off to find a wife for his son Isaac. And the angel had said to Eliezer that when you arrive at the city, and a young woman will come and greet you with the bowl, with bearing and give water to you you and your camels, the mother of the new people, of the great nation that I will create. And this was, of course, the very beginning of the Jewish people. We know that because Isaac married Rebekah, and from then on the genealogy goes down. The Jewish people was founded and formed. On the doors itself, we see to left and right, you can't really see in the drawing too well, but there are cyclical sort of narrative themes spiraling upwards towards the lintel. And then on the doors themselves, we see what appear to be Jewish patriarchal figures from the Old Testament. And below that, we see a little figure carrying grapes and another little figure carrying fish. These are figures that come from seem very linked to the kind of traditions of costume and dress that one would see in the Cape. So these are not necessarily Old Testament subjects. We're looking now at a detailed photograph of the main tympanum, as we would call it, the main sculptural field, which is at the top of the door. And in the very center, we can see Eliezer meeting Rebekah. We can see him offering him a pitcher of water. And we see that others are helping to water the camels and other people. It's a very sort of genre scene with people staring over the city walls. There's trees and plants, and it's a very sort of casual, relaxed scene, but nevertheless a very significant event happening in the very center. We know that some of the faces on these figures were in fact based on live Cape Town personalities who were around at the time. And one of them who's indicated here was a man called Ivan Mitford Barberton, who was also a sculptor, who was in fact Meyerowitz's rival at the National Gallery, because Mitford Barberton also carved a number of over-door panels. And apparently they did not get on too well, and for that reason, Meyerowitz carved Mitford Barberton's portrait staring into the face of a camel. As you know, camels, or you may know, camels have got very, very smelly breath. So that was kind of revenge that he got on Mitford Barberton to be smelling the bad breath of a camel in perpetuity. The door, when you visit it today, and I encourage you to come and see it, looked a little different when the gallery was first opened. As you will see from this photograph, there was an overhead skylight above the door which lit the central figures and obviously highlighted them and created a much better sense of space. However, that light, or that oculus, that light source above on the ceiling, was unfortunately closed up when they decided at some point to do renovations and build extensions upwards in that area. The atrium roof didn't have a story or didn't have offices above it in those days. So sadly, that light has been lost, and the doors, as a result, look much more compressed than they did before. Just looking at the door, I'm just going to make a very brief point that, these cyclical narrative themes that run up and down the sides and on the lintel and the main scene above are very, very much in keeping or in line with some of the traditions of church sculpture, that we see coming out of the European Middle Ages on a lot of churches and cathedrals from the medieval period. And I think that tradition of medieval wood carving would have been something that they, as sculptors, would have absorbed a lot when they were working in Europe and studying in Europe. Because medieval sculpture is also to be found in a lot of wood, as well as contain various narratives from the histories of the Jewish people. But both streams of narrative, which rise vertically and converge into the central lintel, give an indication of the sources from which the Jewish people in South Africa came. So we have at the bottom left, we see a little scene showing the Jews as slaves in Egypt making bricks for Pharaoh. Above Above that, we have the sack of in 70 AD. We have the expulsion above that of the Jews from Spain. We have, above that, we have the settlement of the Jewish refugees from Spain in the Netherlands. And then from the Netherlands, of course, with the Dutch, the colonial Dutch, they start arriving in South Africa. So that's one stream of the Jewish origin of people. The origin of the Jewish people in South Africa. On the right-hand side at the bottom, we have the Babylonian captivity, with people sitting weeping under a willow tree. Above that, we have the Jews being expelled from Arabia because they refused to form an alliance with the new religion of Islam. Above that, we have the Jews in medieval Germany, where they were forced to wear pointed hats. We have, above that, Jews fleeing the pogroms in Eastern Europe and Russia. And then from Eastern Europe and Russia, mainly from Lithuania, we see them arriving again in South Africa. That is, in fact, where the main source of the Jewish population in South Africa comes from. On the main doors itself, in contradistinction to the earlier drawing, which showed the Jewish patriarchs or Old Testament figures, we have seen instead a female figure, African figure personifying agriculture, and we have a male figure holding a sword and a Zulu shield, who seems to personify the fruits of the hunt, in other words, meat and produce. And we have the same figures prancing along on the bottom of the little Cape figures carrying grapes and fish. One assumes in some way that a decision was made at some point to allow the doors themselves to refer directly to what was that made Lieberman so wealthy, and that was his trade in foodstuffs. The produce of the earth and agriculture, animal husbandry, whatever. This was the great source of his wealth. So that, I think, is one of the reasons why they switched to a more African subject. Maybe it had something to do with his wife's interest in Africa, or African subjects. But to a large extent, I suspect, though this is not easy to prove, that the actual swinging doors themselves were in fact carved by Eva Meyerowitz and not Herbert, as they seem to be in a very different style. There's just a reminder of the drawing of the original doors. Now we're just going to look very quickly at some of the themes here. The Jews finding a haven in the Netherlands with the Dutch windmill. This is at the very bottom of the left jam, the Egyptian captivity, and the Jews being forced to make bricks for Pharaoh without the use of straw. The expulsion of the Jews from Catholic Spain in 1492. You can see the walls of the city of Castile there. There are a lot of wonderful architectural elements in all of these little scenes. This is the scene of the Romans burning the Temple of Solomon and killing and murdering the daughters of Jerusalem in AD 70. Here on the right jam, we have the Jews being expelled from Arabia. Again on the right jam, at the very bottom, the Babylonian captivity, sitting next to the weeping willows, next to the Tigris and Euphrates River. Here are the Jews in medieval Germany wearing their funny pointed hats, and the very nice rendering of Speyer Cathedral behind. And now we move to the lintel, where we see the central figure of the matriarch who's nursing and giving suck to a child, supported on left and right by two male figures, patriarchal figures. And we have on the lintel two representations. Here is Morgenster, but you will also find Groot Constantia represented. Now, to move into the Lieberman room itself, we haven't got time to look at all of the sculpture reliefs there, and we've already looked at one of them. But here is one of interest to us, because a maquette or plaster model that was modeled in plaster before this was carved, in fact, has survived and has now entered the collections of the gallery. This is a scene that shows a Jewish tinker who traveled in the rural areas selling blankets and other things to people. There were great itinerant figures that offered a sense of communication between remote outposts in rural areas. And here's a man, he's often sometimes referred to in some literature as Captain Moses, selling blankets. And this is a photograph of the carved wooden panel taken soon after it was finished. If you look at the version that's in the gallery today, it's in fact a lot darker because it's been covered with wood stain. This is the raw wood as it's been carved. And also take note that the long horizontal panel was in fact created by the gluing together or the lamination of various blocks of wood to form this very long horizontal hole. Now here is the plaster model that's somehow surfaced. And what is interesting about this is that it shows that instead of carving directly into the wood, from first hand, this shows something of the sculptor's process. In order to know what depths he needed to chisel and to cut away with the wood, he made a model, in other words, using a modeling clay or plaster to create this maquette that was designed exactly to scale of what the wooden version was going to be. So from this, he was able to, in fact, work out the depths to which he was going to cut and work out, basics of his composition. There was no point in starting blind carving into wood until there was a proper plan in place. And this maquette or model was a way of making sure that he had exactly what he was going to be doing. And this is actually a very nice example of his modeling work rather than the carving work, because you can see that there are fingerprints, there's little comb-like marks, there's very kind of rough handling of the clay, very painterly, very expressive use of the modeling of the wet plaster when he made this. This relief was originally stained a dark brown color, but we managed to, in fact, clean it, and it's been returned to its original condition. Here are some examples of the close-ups. Very, very expressive handling of plaster. And of course, very fragile as well. And a completely different effect to what one would see in the wooden version. Moving from the Lieberman door, I want to talk a little bit about the area around it, because a recent project, which is now nearing completion, brings other works that the Meyerowitzes made into closer proximity to the Lieberman doors. And this involves the installation of a series of 10 reliefs, which are casts, in fact, made from original reliefs that they made between 1938 and 1940 for the Odeon Cinema in Sea Point, which was demolished. This cinema, which they began building in 1938 and which was finished in 1940, was the first modern cinema in Cape Town that had modern air conditioning and was designed by the famous architect Max Poliskansky and partners, who were avowed modernists in their approach to architectural design. Sad to say, the building has been demolished. The original stucco reliefs inside the cinema have also been demolished. And today, as you'll see on the right, a new modern block called the Odeon stands in its place. Sadly, no more theatre, but a whole big block of flats. And here is an example of one of the reliefs that was inside the cinema. These reliefs were originally light in color. They were arranged around the proscenium, or the stage, as a kind of frame for the stage. And there was a whole series of different characters from Greek mythology, in this case, the figure of Mercury, the messenger of the gods. There was also Pan, as you will see, and other different characters. But these are very, very much in a style that we refer to as Art Deco. and they bear a very striking resemblance or look to the two little figures of the prancing men from the Cape carrying the grapes and the fish at the bottom of the Lieberman doors. So, and we know that Ava probably carved those, and we know that she also had a greater hand in the making of these reliefs for the Odeon. We are lucky in that the drawings have survived for some of the reliefs, and we've managed to get these into our collection. And I make a nice comparison here between the drawing that was made with this figure of a ballerina, and we see on the right the sculpted version of it. Now, how was this sculpture made? Well, we know from various accounts that these were modeled directly on the walls using a substance called stucco, which is a mixture of plaster and glue, which makes like a form of plasticine or putty, and that these were modeled directly on the walls and allowed to dry. Unfortunately, the stucco is very fragile, and when the building was demolished, it couldn't be saved. But we did manage to get casts. Casts were in fact made of these reliefs, and we're lucky to have them today. So there are at least 10 works, largely by Ava, with some input from Herbert Meyerowitz, arranged on either side of the Lieberman doors today. Here is the example of the figure of Pan. I haven't got time to show you all of them. You can see by comparing the drawing with the sculpture that there is in fact some changes being made as the artist worked along. The drawing didn't become the final unchangeable image. You can see that changes have been made. The insertion of a tree trunk, the change of the panpipes for a harp, and so on. This is the installation of the reliefs, as this is work that's still in progress. The reliefs were in fact cast in a very dark material, in concrete, a concrete substance known as cement fondu, which takes much finer sort of detail than ordinary concrete would, and is often used by sculptors. And we see that them being worked on here by various staff members, and our conservator Bettina Elton, who is trying out various paint samples, because these reliefs have now been painted white. They've been taken back to the original color that they were in the theatre. And here are 3 of them installed in situ, and here is another 3. Extremely heavy, so they've been mounted on the walls, stainless steel clasps, so that they can't fall down. And as a finish, as a kind of parting moment, I'd just like to draw your attention to some of the other sculptures by Ava Meyerowitz that can be seen in proximity to the gallery. For example, the Puto and Dolphin Fountain, which you can see right in front of the National Gallery. Sad to say, the Puto rides a dolphin that has lost its head now, but we are trying to get that restored through the City Council, who actually owns this fountain. Then further down, you have the Delvillewood Memorial, where again Ava made a contribution, where the carved lion's heads on the central column of the memorial have, which can be seen there. These were carved by her. And then just looking back at the National Gallery facade, the very top of the facade, the relief above the main porch and all the rest, these are also by Ava Meyerowitz. So she left quite an imprint here in Cape Town. Also at the Claremont Civic Centre, they also did reliefs inside the old Curzon Cinema in Wynberg. These are the figures of Adam and Eve, which are on the front door of the National Gallery, on the door frame. And then, just in a final remark, the famous old Alhambra Theatre, which was demolished in 1972, also contained quite a number of sculptures that they'd made, but unfortunately they were never saved. And that's the end.
Hayden, thank you so much for that very, very interesting and in-depth presentation. And I hope to hear from quite a few of the participants. Please, a reminder to send your questions for Hayden through to me in the chat function. If you go to the drop-down box under everyone, you'll find me, Glynn Alard, and just type in your question, which I will then refer to Hayden. Our next presenter is Angela Zehnder, who will be speaking about new insights in technical examination of paintings at the Iziko South African National Gallery. Angela is a painting conservator and has obtained a Master of Arts degree in conservation of fine art, specifically easel painting, from the University of Northumbria at Newcastle in the United Kingdom. She has established numerous articles relating to arts at the Iziko South African National Gallery, including new insights, technical imaging of paintings in Iziko South African National Gallery, Butcher Boys, an iconic sculpture and its conservation, and finally, Painted Surfaces, a technical study of South African paintings from the Iziko South African National Gallery. Angela, I just know that we're going to enjoy your presentation very much. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Angela. I'm a painting conservator, and it's really special to be here today to talk to you about the wonderful subject of technical examination of paintings. They can reveal the most wonderful information if you look at a painting a little bit more closely with a microscope or with side light, with raking light, or ultraviolet or infrared reflectography. It can give you new stories about the painting, and it can provide better care as well. Microscopic examination allows you to look at painting a little bit more closely, up to 40 times magnification, and you can look at the painted surface, at the cracks, at the brush strokes, and whether there have been underlying changes. And it can really help with the treatments of paintings as well. With this wonderful painting by Frida Locke, one was able to discover that the painting had actually been completed, the artist had completed it a year before, and then went back to this painting and reworked it and has then signed it again. So you're seeing the underlying part painterment detail on the bottom right. Raking light is one of my favorites, and you just put a light on the side of the painting and you can see the surface textures and whether there's maybe been some underlying painting there that one can see what is there, and can also expose previous restorations. With this wonderful painting by Pemba, one can see the underlying texture of the ground that he applied before painting the painting. Ultraviolet light is a short wavelength, and it can provide you with information about the surface of the painting. Is the painting varnished? What kind of varnish is painted that the artist has used? And it can also share information about the pigments, or whether it's been restored and how recently it has been restored. It's a simple technique where you just use an ultraviolet light glasses because of it being a short wavelength, and you use a camera with a filter. Then you use just to photograph it, or just look with a torch. You can even get these torches from camping shops that help you find scorpions, in case you love many subjects. With this wonderful painting of Van Eveningen, one's able to see under ultraviolet light the overpaint, which shows up as dark. Sometimes the dark that you see in ultraviolet light is also an indication of a pigment. But in this case, this information, together with other information, allows one to know that it is overpaint. With this wonderful painting of Mustafa Maluka's Don't Stand Me Down, one discovers all sorts of wonderful information. So one sees in the central image, the lips are bright pink, And that is typical of rose madder. And that was one of his favorite, and still is one of his favorite colors. On the image on the right-hand side is the infrared, which shows the underlying painting that shows through of the pattern at the back, which adds meaning to the painting because of his family were part Maori. With infrared photography, it's using a specialized camera that is able to reveal the underlying layers of the painting. You can see the example below, which is Richard Mudoriki's Economy of Scale. And in the underground layers, he has shown a detail of a bull. He forgot he had painted this bull. And when I emailed him and asked him about it, he was quite shocked. How do you know? Which was lovely. And he was very excited to see this wonderful bull, which he decided that he was not going to show after all. And we could discover this because he had used either a black paint or a carbon paint. Infrared reflectography is even a longer wavelength using a very sophisticated camera. And one is able to see even more information further to the infrared photograph. With this painting of the Sir A.B. Bailey collection, one is able to see that the artist Davis painted a whole lot of different figures in the background that he then decided to paint out. So all these secrets you would not have been able to know about always if it wasn't for being able to look a little bit more deeply into the painting. With this painting, one can see how infrared photography and infrared reflectography can show even more. Each stage reveals greater detail and greater depth, with the angel that you see circled along on the side. And with Charles Shannon, it was very exciting. Through Raking light, I thought to X-ray the painting, which was wonderfully made possible at the South African Museum, which you see on the right-hand side. And with infrared reflectography, one was able to see different information about the changes of the painting. And it adds meaning to the appreciation of the painting. He admired very much the Venetian painters, which were quite painterly, and they were able to change their painting on the canvas. So in conclusion, with these different techniques, you can discover all sorts of new, wonderful information about the painting. And with that provided better care and just more information, which you can share through research and exhibitions. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Angela. I'm a painting conservator.
Thank you, Angela, for your interesting presentation. Our last one for the day is to be delivered by Enoch Bangeni, and his title is The State of the Storages at the Iziko South African National Gallery. Enoch Bangeni currently works at the Iziko South African National Gallery as a collections assistant manager since 2012. He has obtained an advanced diploma in public administration from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Enoch, forward to hearing from you.
My name is Enoch Bangeni. I've been working at the National Gallery as a collection assistant manager since 2012 till to date. It was not been an easy journey for me. The reason being, few months after joining the collection team, my collection manager then, Robert Citrus, left the company, and it was swim and sink situation for me. Due to the assistance of the art gallery curators and then our director, Mr. Riyasin Naidu, I managed to cope and settled well at the national department, at the collection department, sorry. The most challenging period, it was the time that I had to exceed the expectation of the department. Well, I didn't have someone to guide me. supervise me since I was still on the process of familiarizing myself with the department. But to cut the story short, through all these ups and downs that I have gone through during my first days at collections, it was worth it concerning the experience I have gained and I have grown from strength to strength. So today I would like to talk about the functions of my duties as a collection assistant manager, because some other people, they don't understand what the collection assistant entails. So today I will talk about my functions as a collection assistant and the storages at Iziko National Gallery. Firstly, as a collection assistant manager, I have to work closely to the curators in terms of preparing the exhibitions and also during the process of acquisitions. During the process of acquisitions, there's an acquisition committee that sits in terms of making the decisions of which artworks that should be purchased. So after that process has been finalized in terms of they come up with their consensus decisions which artworks that should be purchased. As a collection department, we collect all those artworks that have been agreed that they have to be purchased. We put them at the holding room at room 6, where we register everything in terms of giving them accession numbers, checking the conditions of the artworks. Then each and every artwork in terms of the collection where it belongs. Like for instance, you will have a painting which you have to go to the basement. So we do have a basement storage where we keep our historical paintings and sculptures. And then we will have a print room and a photographic storage where we keep the works on paper and the photographs. And then we will have the African storage where we keep African artworks like the beads and the textiles or the blankets. It depends to the nature of or the quality of the artworks. And then we will have room 7. Room 7 is reserved to store the large paintings and sculptures. And then we also have a place called a hockey. I know that maybe the name is not everyone familiar with the name, but we call it a hockey because it's not a permanent structure. So that's where we keep our large paintings, also the sculptures. So these storages are reserved to keep all our collection. So after the acquisitions has been approved that this particular artworks, we're gonna purchase it. So as art collection, we take all these artworks to their respective storages. That's where we keep them. Because before everything is done in terms of preparing the exhibitions, that's where all these artworks have to be kept. So each and every storage, there's a required temperature that is needed to be monitored all times. So that is part of our job, going to each and every storage to make sure that a required temperature is being something like we are using something like what you call time logo to set the temperature and to assess the temperature each and every storage. So as you could see at room 7, we are using racks where we keep artworks on the racks, and also we are using the sponges in terms of if we are having a limited space on the racks, then we put the other artworks on top of the sponges and to make sure that why we are keeping them on top of the sponges. We are trying to avoid any unforeseen situation in terms of the floods. If there could be any flood, at least they are safe because we are putting them on top of the blocks. So we not just put them on the floors. So we're just using the sponges in terms of making sure that everything is being like used under the museum practice. So we're using those blocks to make sure that they are not being put directly on the floor. And then the challenge, the other thing that we are having as a challenge at the room 6. Room 6 is not like a permanent space that we are using as a holding room. It depends whether if the room is available, then because it's also reserved for projector to be used something, if there's something like meetings, we are using the same room. So it's also reserved for such functions. So it's not something like it's reserved only for the holding room. So due to the limited space, we are forced to jungle and try to find options in order to meet the museum practice. There was something like exchange information in terms of visiting to other countries. We had the opportunity to go to Washington. We were 7 of us coming from Iziko. So that program, it was the program of trying to exchange the information in terms of how they do things that side of the world, with what we are doing in South Africa. And then the way they are doing things that side, it was really amazing to see their storages, because coming back to South Africa, by the time we had some meetings with the curators, something that was amazing compared to what we are doing this side. They don't keep the artworks, like in terms of storages, in the same building with exhibition space. They do have galleries that side of the world. They do have storage on other side of the world. So which means the challenge to them is, sorry, the space is not a problem because they have a massive space in terms of keeping their collection. But yet in South Africa, we're having a storage challenge of owning building, because even the buildings that we are using is government buildings. So it's not easy to just come up with any renovations to expand storages. There are processes that we need to follow. So that was the challenge and the comparison that I had by the time we went to Washington and see how they do things on that side of the world. Yes, there are recommendations that we managed to take by the time we came back, but in terms of getting some funding to implement whatever that we suggest in terms of expanding our storage, it was a challenge.
Enoch, thank you for your presentation. I hope that you've enjoyed today's proceedings, and I do hope to see you all back tomorrow. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.